2024 is always going to be a season to remember for the Detroit Lions and their fans. It was a year where, even though defensively they had probably more injuries and more impactful injuries than the rest of the league, they still were able to win the franchise record with 15 games this year. And they were one of, if not the best offense in the NFL. I would venture to say they probably were the best in the NFL this year. And they were one of the best offenses in all of football in the last 15 to 20 years. However, as we all know, the Detroit Lions lost in their first playoff game of the 2024 season to the Washington Commanders 45 to 31. Even with that loss, I think this is still a season to remember for their fans, for the team, and for this franchise to kind of look back and say, a 15-2 win being disappointing, that's a long way from where they were about 5 to 10 years ago, and being happy just to get a handful of wins in the season. Going back to the offense, I already said that they probably were the best offense in the league, and the statistics back that up. Everything down to their individual stats, where you see Jared Goff have over 4,500 yards, 37 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. You have Jahmyr Gibbs, who led the league in total touchdowns. You have David Montgomery, who even in a year where he was injured for the last few games of the season, he still was able to produce 1,000 yards from scrimmage year, 12 touchdowns. And I think one of the pieces that finally got unlocked in the 2024 season was Jameson Williams. His over 1,000 yards season, I think it's exactly where you want to see him at in this offense and in his current development. Now, the defense wasn't really close to the same production as the offense. I mean, still in the top 10 in terms of scoring defense, rushing defense, and in terms of getting takeaways. But their inability to get after the quarterback and to affect him in the air with, just limiting gains, this team was pretty poor in that respect. And that's not really to blame them. It's just kind of to shine light on the fact that this team, 5 games through the year, lost Aiden Hutchinson. And due to how poorly they were able to get after the quarterback, he was the leading sack man through 5 games this year. I mean, it's really a testament just how good this offense was, that a defense in 2024 was this bad at getting after the quarterback. They still won 15 games. Now, the defense, other than Aiden Hutchinson, had guys that performed well too. Kirby Joseph led the NFL in interceptions. You have Brian Branch, who took his next step as, a pretty well-known name around the NFL as one of those great young players, especially at safety. He's got a long, very good career ahead of him. And Jack Campbell finally, I guess I shouldn't say finally, in his 3rd season, he's become a really good player. Now, very obviously, this team is going to have new coordinators at each of their sides of the ball. The new offensive coordinator is going to be John Morton, who has been the passing game coordinator for the last few years with the Denver Broncos. He has a pretty long history with Sean Payton himself, and even going back to when Dan Campbell was in New Orleans with Sean Payton, these guys have worked together, and John Morton was actually with the Detroit Lions a few years ago, before Ben Johnson really took over as the known name on the offensive coordinating side of the ball. He was kind of, I think he was put in like a senior offensive assistant position. So he knows this offense. He knows the players of this offense. And even with new defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard, even though he is new in the position, this is his first defensive coordinator position. This is a guy that's been with the Detroit Lions, again, like John Morton, since I believe 2021 or 2020. He's been here for a while. He is a guy that knows this defense. It's going to be a pretty similar team, I think, coaching-wise, because they promoted within. And I think that's the best route to go, especially when you have such a good team. There is going to be a lot of guys personnel-wise on the actual football team that are going to be different at various positions this year. They're poised to have 35 guys hit free agency. There's the obvious names where you want to you probably want to have Dan Skipper back. You're interested in bringing back guys like Carlton Davis or Emmanuel Mosley or Efetu Melifonwu. Like you're pretty interested in that, but there is a pretty big trade opportunity for the Detroit Lions coming up that I think I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of these guys play somewhere else next year. Especially when you look at what is on the roster, even with all of those guys that I just listed, if all of those guys don't play on Detroit next year, they still have a pretty deep roster. The only position I think you would want to add more to is corner, safety, and, a third running back. That's really it. I mean, you maybe add some younger offensive linemen that you hope to develop, but there's not a lot of positions on this team that need to be changed up. I think they're pretty complete as a roster. So offensively for the free agency goals, like I already mentioned, I think it's re-signing Dan Skipper, and I'm sure Detroit wants to bring back Kevin Zeitler, but I just don't know how much that's going to cost, if it really makes sense for them to bring him back. He might be playing somewhere else next year. I think a third running back at the level of someone like Raheem Mostert or Daria Gumbawale could be the perfect guy to just set this offense over the top, because you'll just always have a guy on the field that can make a play. Or especially in Daria Gumbawale's case, like if you need some blocking in the backfield, you don't gotta force Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery to be in there blocking. That's not what they're on the field to do. So you have somebody like Daria Gumbawale, who is a really good pass protector at the running back position, and he can catch the ball really well. So I think he's a perfect third player with Gibbs and Montgomery. And it would be perfect in an ideal world to replace Tim Patrick, who it wasn't a huge name for the Detroit Lions last year, but he was that third, fourth receiver that could be relied on later in the year when they needed big plays out of guys. I think if you do lose Tim Patrick, you get somebody like Sterling Shepard or Nick Westbrook-Akine, who I think Nick Westbrook-Akine is a pretty similar player, size-wise, what he can do well, to Tim Patrick. So I think he would slot into this offense pretty easily. And then at tight end, get somebody like Jawan Johnson or Tommy Tremble to just be, the same thing as what I'm saying for Shepard and Westbrook-Akine. Just some depth pieces that can be relied on late in the season. So plan A for the defense. This team is never going to be able to do anything. Win the Super Bowl, win playoff games. They're not doing anything until they can get after the quarterback. And yes, it's going to be great to rely on Aiden Hutchinson again. You need someone else with him. Myles Garrett is the perfect trade opportunity. I think, just give up this year's draft, honestly. I mean, really honestly. Just trade them the entire draft this year and see what they say. That should... I don't see why you don't do that. If they can't do it, if they can't get Myles Garrett, you have to still add to the D-line. So you have to get one of the big names. DeMarcus Lawrence, Khalil Mack. I'm pretty sure it's almost a given that Joey Bosa is going to end up not with the Chargers next year because he's going to get released at some point. So, Joey Bosa is a decent option. Chase Young, Josh Sweat, any of the big name moves. That's what needs to be done. Corner depth is also a must for this team. They're poised to lose a lot of their snaps from last year between Carlton Davis, Melifonwu, everybody else that's going to be probably playing for a new roster. So you need more there. You have Rakestraw, you have Amik Robertson, you have Terry and Arnold, but you need more. Arnold somewhat struggled through last year, and I just don't know how much you can rely on Robertson and Rakestraw to be your everyday corners successfully. I just don't know how well you can do that. Stephon Gilmore, Adoree Jackson, or a Paulson Adebo, those would be the guys to kind of help out those three guys I already mentioned. Draft goals. Now, I already mentioned that plan A for the defense should just be trade this year's whole draft for Myles Garrett. So plan A, if that happens, my draft goals are that they already won. They got Myles Garrett. But plan B, whoever's the best edge rusher available or corner that they feel the best about. If it's an edge rusher, someone like Mike Green or Nick Scorton, if they're available, you have pretty talented corners between Jahdae Barron and Siobhan Revel. So if one of those guys is available and you can't get that edge rusher, that's who you go with as a corner. 2025 is probably going to be pretty good to the Detroit Lions. All they really are doing is adding to the actual roster. They're not going to have the same coaching staff going into next year, and they're not going to have the same, most important voice. That most important voice on the offensive side is changing with the offensive coordinator, and same with the D coordinator. It's changing. So the players will have to be better. Everybody's going to have to be better. And it's a bit weird to say that for a team that was the best they've ever been in franchise history. And they need to get better. But that's just what it is. And I think that it's pretty possible. They've gotten better every single year. There's no reason to think that they won't.